My brother-in-law humiliated me online and wrote me what I discovered before sunrise will shock you. It was 4:37 a.m, just before sunrise on my wedding day, when I found out the first betrayal that would rip through every part of my life. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and there it was, a flood of private photos and forced messages posted online under my name. Pictures of me, twisted, edited, humiliating like I was insane. Someone had even taken my grandmother's silver necklace, the one I wore whenever I needed courage, and mocked it in captions. That necklace was my anchor, and seeing it drag through felt like someone tearing my chest open. At first, I thought it was some random hacker. But when I scrolled further, my stomach sank. This was too personal. The words matched old conversations twisted into ugliness. The timing on my wedding day. No stranger would know these details. And in the pit of my stomach, I already suspected Ethan, my brother-in-law. I should rewind. My name is Douglas. I'm 45 now, but back then I was 39, and I was supposed to be the happiest groom alive. Life hadn't been kind to me. During my first marriage, I already knew betrayal my ex-wife drained our joint bank account and ran off with a coworker. That left me with nothing but a half-empty apartment and an $89 grocery bill I could barely cover with cheap ramen noodles. I told myself I'd never be blindsided again. And yet, here I was. Ethan was my wife's younger brother. At 42, he had that smug way of pretending to be the fun uncle, the guy who cracked jokes too loud at family dinners, the one who smelled of whiskey even at church. But underneath that charm, there was a sharpness. He'd cut you just to watch you bleed. Still, I ignored the warnings. I want to peace. The weeks before the wedding should have been joy-filled. Roses from our backyard garden filled the house with their scent. My fiancée, Lily, loved arranging them. But tension kept creeping in. Ethan inserted himself into planning, commenting on costs, making sly remarks about me finally being able to keep a wife. When I pushed back, he laughed it off. Doug, relax, I'm just joking. But my chest always tightened, the way it does before a panic attack. That morning, sitting on the edge of my bed staring at my ruined reputation splashed across the internet, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled so badly I dropped the phone. My cousin Isaac, who'd been crashing on a couch downstairs, ran up when he heard me gagging. Doug, what's happening? He asked, his voice still hoarse from sleep. I showed him the screen. He froze. Jesus Christ. Who would... Then he stopped, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. He already suspected Ethan too. But here's the thing, betrayal rarely comes just once. It's a seed that grows into roots, then a forest, then a wildfire. That post wasn't just to humiliate me, it was part of something darker. At that moment, I didn't know that Ethan was tied up in medical fraud, that he was using organ donation scams to bankroll his lifestyle. I didn't know I was about to be dragged into a nightmare that would leave me with complex PTSD, severe insomnia, and a neighbourhood that whispered behind my back every time I walked by. All I knew was that the man who was supposed to stand beside me as family had just set fire to my life. Isaac grabbed my shoulders. We have to get ahead of this, don't let them win. His loyalty was the only thing keeping me upright. But even then, my mind raced with panic. What if the guests saw it before the ceremony? What if Flea saw it and thought it was real? What if my second chance at life ended before I even said my vows? I put on my suit hours later with shaking hands. The silver necklace hung heavy on my chest, no longer an anchor but a reminder of violation. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a man already broken before he walked down the aisle. And as the day unfolded, the red flags that I'd ignored in Ethan's behaviour began to stack higher, each one pointing to a betrayal deeper than I could have imagined. The wedding day should have been a blur of joy, but instead, every moment was tinted with paranoia. I kept scanning faces in the crowd, wondering who had seen the forged messages, who believed them. When the pastor said, "If anyone objects, speak now or forever hold your peace," my chest tightened so hard I thought I'd collapse. I half expected Ethan to stand up smirking, holding his phone in the air. He didn't, but his eyes locked on mine, and there was that smug grin. Later at the reception, while people laughed and clinked glasses, I felt like I was under a microscope. My cousin Isaac stayed glued to my side. He leaned in once, whispering, "Don't eat anything Ethan hands you." At the time I thought it was paranoia, but those words would come back to haunt me. Ethan gave his toast just before dinner, holding a glass too long, like he wanted the room to orbit him. "To Douglas," he said, his tone half mocking, half sincere. "A man who somehow convinced my sister to settle for cheap ramen noodles and an $89 grocery bill. May your marriage last longer than your first one." The room laughed awkwardly. My stomach twisted. Lou squeezed my hand under the table, whispering, "He's just been Ethan." But the laughter wasn't harmless, it cut into me. He turned my scars into punchlines. During my first marriage, I remember one night when my ex slammed a door and shouted, "You'll never be enough, Doug." That voice haunted me for years. And hearing Ethan echo the same message in front of everyone, it rewired my brain back into that same place of worthlessness. My therapist would later call it a trauma trigger. At that moment, all I knew was I couldn't breathe. When I stepped outside for air, I caught neighbours whispering near the garden roses. They didn't notice me listening. "Did you see what was online?" one said. "Poor Lily," the other replied. "She's marrying into a mess." My throat closed. My own wedding guests were gossiping like I was a scandal, not the groom. Isaac found me pacing the driveway. "The Doug, this is bigger than humiliation," he said. "I think Ethan's covering something up. I've been watching him." "What do you mean?" I asked. "He keeps visiting the hospital at odd hours, and I overheard him on the phone talking about donors, not charity donors' organs, like black market stuff." I stared at him, thinking he'd lost his mind. But then I remembered Ethan once bragging about knowing people in the medical field, and how he always had cash for expensive watches even though he hadn't worked a real job in years. Still, I wanted to dismiss it. I told Isaac, "That's insane, he's cruel." "Yeah, but he wouldn't." Isaac cut me off. Doug, trust your gut. Something's off. Don't let the past blind you again. Those words stung. He knew how badly I ignored red flags during my first marriage. And deep down, I feared he was right. Later that night, I confronted Ethan in the kitchen while he poured himself another whiskey. Why would you humiliate me today? I asked. He smirked. Relax, brother. If you can't take a joke, you shouldn't be in this family. Was it you who leaked my photos? My voice shook. His smile didn't waver. If I wanted to ruin you, Doug, trust me, I'd do it in a way you wouldn't recover from. He clinked his glass against mine and walked away. That was the moment the first undeniable red flag planted itself deep. The casual cruelty. The threat disguised as banter. My skin crawled. The weeks after the wedding, I couldn't sleep. Insomnia clawed at me. I woke up before sunrise, every day, gasping from nightmares, sometimes of my ex, sometimes of Ethan, sometimes of strangers tearing roses from the garden and shoving them down my throat. My therapist would later say my nervous system was stuck in fight or flight. And then came the incident that made me realize Ethan wasn't just cruel, he was dangerous. One night, I found strange pills in my glass of water on the nightstand. Lily swore she hadn't put them there. Isaac tested them with a kit he had. Don't ask why he had one, and they weren't vitamins. They were sedatives. Someone was drugging me. I felt the ground slip beneath me. Was this how I'd been feeling sick for months? Dizzy, exhausted, like my brain wasn't mine. Had it been Ethan slipping things into my drinks during family dinners? My mind spiraled. That was when I knew this wasn't paranoia. This was real. And it was only going to get worse. 3 weeks after the wedding, the weight of it all finally cracked me open. I'd been waking up before sunrise every day, soaked in sweat, clutching my grandmother's silver necklace like a lifeline. The nightmares were relentless images of strangers cutting into me, roses torn from my garden and scattered over a hospital bed, Ethan laughing in the background. My therapist, Dr. Green, called it complex PTSD from sustained. Your brain has been rewired to expect danger, she said in our 4th session. That's why you're hypervigilant. It's not paranoia, it's survival. And then Isaac brought me the proof. He'd been quietly digging. One night he came over with a thumb drive and a fist pale as milk. You need to see this, he said, setting his laptop on my kitchen table. We were eating cheap ramen noodles off fallback when the grocery bill hit $89 again and my savings were drained. Isaac's hand shook as he opened folder after folder. Hospital records, donor lists, payments. Ethan's name was everywhere. Not as a doctor, he wasn't even licensed, but as a facilitator, in some grotesque court and donation ring. There were emails, invoices, even notes on which patients were viable. But the worst file was mine. My name, my medical records, even my blood type. You've been on his list for years, Isaac whispered. He's been dragging you to keep you weak. I couldn't breathe. My chest burned. The kitchen walls blurred. He was going to take something from me. Isaac's eyes shone with fury. Doug, you are next. I think he wanted to make you look unstable so no one would believe you if you disappeared or got sick. I stumbled to the sink and vomited. My mind flashed every time I felt dizzy at family dinners, every drink Ethan handed me, every moment I thought I was just tired from work. And then came the second betrayal, the one that almost finished me. I went to the police. I gathered the files Isaac had compiled, walked into the station shaking but determined. But the officer at the desk barely glanced at the papers before folding them shut. We'll look into it, he said. 2 days later, I learned why nothing was happening. The officer, Sergeant Miller, was Ethan's cousin. He buried my report before it even got logged. My hand shook so badly I dropped my phone when Isaac told me. I felt like I'd been dropped into some nightmare where every door I ran to for help led back to Ethan. Meanwhile, the social damage was snowballing. People at work whispered. My boss called me in. Doug, you need to take a leave, she said, her eyes sliding away from mine. We're getting complaints about your behaviour. She meant the forged messages, the rumours Ethan had seeded online. Clients avoided me. Neighbours stared as I took out the trash. A woman across the street actually crossed herself when I walked past. I became a ghost to my own life. The isolation was complete. Lily, my wife, tried to believe me but was drowning too. Doug, she whispered one night, maybe it's just stress, maybe you're imagining how bad it is. Her doubt gutted me more than Ethan's cruelty. That's when I stopped telling her everything. But I wasn't as helpless as Ethan thought. Even as the panic attack shredded my sleep, even as my hands trembled so badly I could barely hold a pen, I started documenting everything: screenshots, voice memos, times, dates. If I was going down, I was leaving a trail. One night, before sunrise, I sat at the kitchen table, the smell of stale roses from a bouquet Lily had left on the counter filling the air. My silver necklace glinted in the dim light. I whispered to myself, they turned my strengths into weaknesses, but I still have one thing, proof. It was the only thing keeping me from breaking completely, the idea that if I just held on long enough, I could expose them all. And then, an opportunity came unexpected, explosive, and terrifying. My child's birthday party was coming up. Ethan would be there. So would many of the people who doubted me. I realized if I was ever going to reveal the truth, it had to be then. I didn't know if it would destroy me or save me, but I knew it was my only shot. The morning of my child's 7th birthday, I woke up before sunrise, my heart hammering in my chest. The nightmares from the past months hadn't stopped, they'd just gotten louder, but today, I had a mission. I put on my grandmother's silver necklace, the one Ethan had mocked on my wedding day, and felt its weight grounding me. The roses from the garden spilled their scent into the room as I packed the evidence into a discreet folder and hid it in my jacket. Isaac met me at the door. Doug, you ready? He asked, eyes scanning the empty street. I don't know, I admitted. My hand shook violently. But I have to do this. The party started in the backyard at 3:00 p.m. Kids ran around, balloons sagging in the early afternoon heat, the smell of cheap hot dogs mingling with birthday cake. Lily tried to distract herself by corralling the chaos. Ethan arrived late, of course, wearing that same smug grin that had haunted me for months. I watched him casually greet neighbours, laughing, waving. My stomach churned. The whispers had already started. People knew I'd been humiliated online. I could feel their eyes like needles, but now I had the power. Now I had evidence. I waited until the cake-cutting ceremony. My son, Jake, beamed as he blew out the candles. I held the folder under my arm and took a deep breath. Everyone, I said, voice trembling but loud enough to cut through the chatter. I need to say something. Heads turned. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ethan's smirk faltered slightly. I've been a target, I said, my hands gripping the folder. Targeted, harassed, and even drugged by someone in this family, and I have proof. I opened the folder and projected it onto a small tablet I'd connected to a speaker. Emails, photos, medical records, voice memos all meticulously documented. The crowd gasped. Ethan's face went pale. You can't prove that, he stammered. I already have, I said. You've been running an organ donation scam. You drugged me for years, and now the evidence is in front of you all. The chaos hit like a storm. Lily's face went from shock to horror. Children screamed as parents tried to pull them back. Neighbours whispered, some crying, some muttering about the betrayal. Ethan tried to grab the tablet from me. Isa shoved him away, yelling, back off, you sick son of a... Call the police, someone shouted. And this time, they listened. The authorities arrived within minutes. Ethan was handcuffed in the driveway, still sputtering, while the neighbours squawked and whispered. But the shock didn't stop there. Another bombshell, the officer, who had buried my reports. Also there. When confronted by his superior and shown the evidence, he couldn't lie. His attempts to cover Ethan's crimes fell apart in seconds. I watched Ethan being led away, his smug grin finally gone. But the victory wasn't sweet, it was raw, draining. I had exposed him, yes, but I also realised how much he'd cost me, my career, my friends, my home, and the last shreds of normalcy in my life. Afterward, while Jake hugged me and whispered, Daddy, I knew you'd save us, I sank to the grass. The roses swirled in the afternoon air. I felt my body trembling not from fear, but from exhaustion. My panic attacks were relentless, but for the first time in months I felt a flicker of control. Isaac sat beside me. You did it, he said quietly. He fought back. I had no choice, I whispered, tears mixing with sweat. They turned my strengths into weaknesses, but I refused to let them win entirely. That night, alone in my room, I couldn't sleep. The memories of betrayal replayed endlessly, the cheap ramen nights, the $89 grocery bills, the whispers of neighbours, the police cover-up, but this time, I didn't feel paralysed. I had taken action. I had exposed the truth. The aftermath would be messy, painful, and humiliating in its own way. But for the first time, I had hoped that I could reclaim my life. The nightmare wasn't over, but at least now, I wasn't running blind. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of trauma and fear, I felt the first spark of empowerment. The days after the birthday confrontation were worse than I could have imagined. Ethan was arrested, yes, but the damage he'd done wasn't contained to him. My reputation had been shredded across social media, whispered about by neighbours, and ridiculed in workplaces. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. One morning, before sunrise, I walked to the corner store and overheard two women whisper, That's him, the one with all those scandalous posts online. My chest tightened, my pulse raced, and I had to grip the counter just to buy milk. Lily tried to hold the household together, but our marriage strained under the weight of suspicion and public shame. She would sometimes ask, her voice trembling, Doug, do you really think we're safe now? And I'd nod, even though I didn't feel safe anywhere. My sleep had all but vanished. I spent nights pacing, clutching my grandmother's silver necklace, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and imagining Ethan lurking in the shadows. Therapy became a lifeline. Dr. Green had me sitting under harsh fluorescent lights in her office, going through the trauma step by step. Doug, your complex PTSD isn't going away overnight, she said. We need to retrain your nervous system to trust it, even just a little. I learned grounding exercises, touch the necklace, smell the roses, repeat calming phrases. But the nightmares persisted, the panic attacks hit in the grocery store aisles, and every $89 grocery bill became a trigger. Even friends I trusted faltered. Some distanced themselves, unsure of which version of events to believe. Every coffee, every casual visit became a minefield. My phone rang less often, the messages dried up, and I felt the isolating sting of social judgment. Isaac was still my anchor, the one who helped me sift through evidence and organise our next steps. But even his support couldn't replace the friendships I'd lost. I remember one particularly brutal night. I woke, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering, convinced someone was in my apartment. Cheap ramen noodles from the fridge called to me because I couldn't eat anything else without nausea. I called Isaac at 2:43 a.m., whispering, I can't do this, I can't. His voice was steady. Doug, breathe, you're safe, I'm coming over. The police investigation was slow. Ethan's arrest didn't immediately mean justice. Evidence had to be corroborated, and the fact that a cousin had buried my earlier report meant corruption threads ran deeper than I knew. I spent hours on hold, in meetings, and on calls with lawyers. Every interaction drained me physically and emotionally. My anxiety soared. Panic attacks struck at the grocery store when the cashier looked at me suspiciously. Even the smell of roses, once comforting, sometimes triggered memories of betrayal. And yet, amidst the chaos, I began noticing the smallest victories. I could go an hour without freezing in place. I could eat a meal without scanning every person in the room. The therapist noted progress. Douglas, these aren't failures, they're signs of resilience. Still, the public shame lingered. Neighbours continued whispering, co-workers avoided eye contact, and the press had splashed the story across the city. Financially, I was in ruin. Ethan had siphoned so much money through the organ donation scam that my savings, already fragile after the wedding and past debts, were gone. My $89 grocery bills became emblematic of survival. Yet each morning, I woke before sunrise and reminded myself I survived something worse. I had survived Ethan. By the end of this period, I was broken in ways that went beyond physical or social. I was fractured psychologically. But I had proof. I had Isaac. I had a therapist who understood my mind had been rewired. And, crucially, I had my son. Through the darkness, I realized the rock bottom wasn't just a place of despair. It was also a turning point. If I wanted to reclaim my life, I had to embrace the trauma, document the damage, and rebuild systematically. I started journaling again, recording every interaction, every feeling, every symptom, every whisper. The nightmare had exposed more than Ethan. It had revealed the fragility of trust, the cruelty people could hide behind family ties, and the insidious nature of abuse. I was alone, humiliated, and exhausted. But I was alive. And for the first time in months, that alone felt like a small, trampling victory. Recovery didn't happen overnight. For months, I lived in the shadow of my own trauma, waking before sunrise, tracing the weight of my grandmother's silver necklace on my chest, listening to the faint scent of roses from the garden to ground myself. Each panic attack felt like a betrayal of my body, each whisper from neighbours like a reminder that my reputation had been shattered. But slowly, the pieces began to knit back together, not the same as before, but stronger. Therapy became my roadmap. Dr. Green guided me through exposure exercises to reduce my hypervigilance. I practiced walking past neighbours who whispered, slowly allowing myself to feel my pulse slow instead of letting it spike into terror. I revisited every corner of my past, my first marriage, the wedding day, the moments with Ethan, learning to separate what had been done to me from who I was. Cognitive processing therapy helped me reframe memories that once triggered nightmares. By tracing my trauma in words, I began reclaiming my narrative. I also leaned heavily on Isaac. He helped me organise the digital evidence I had secretly compiled. Together, we contacted the authorities again, filing reports that could no longer be ignored. Slowly, justice began to take shape. Ethan's accomplices were investigated. The police officer who buried my reports faced scrutiny, and the organ donation scandal unravelled publicly. The vindication was painstakingly slow, but it existed. The social repair was trickier. Some friends returned after seeing the evidence, others stayed away. Lily and I attended couples therapy, rebuilding trust strained to the point of breaking. At Douglas, she said one evening after months of hard conversations, "I see you again, I see the man I married." Her words anchored me more than any therapy session. I began taking small risks, going to the grocery store alone, attending community events, speaking at survivor gatherings. Each success, however small, chipped away at the panic and insomnia. I also discovered the power of community. By sharing my story with local survivor networks, I met others who had been betrayed by family, by medical systems, by those they trusted most. Together, we formed a support network. We discussed coping strategies, celebrated victories, and mourned losses. For the first time, I realized that the isolation Ethan had inflicted could be replaced with connection. Financially, it was slow but steady. I picked up consulting work, documented my progress meticulously, and finally felt some control over the $89 grocery bills that had once symbolized survival. Cheap ramen noodles remained a comfort food for quiet evenings, a small reminder that I had endured and could still find normalcy. The final and most powerful step was reclaiming my voice publicly. I spoke at survivor panels, shared my story anonymously online, and used the evidence I had collected to educate others about medical fraud and family betrayal. Each time I recounted the ordeal, I felt the trauma's grip loosen slightly. My nightmares diminished, my panic attacks became rarer, and I slept more deeply before sunrise, even without medication. Looking back, the transformation was astonishing. I went from being a man broken by betrayal, drugged, humiliated, abandoned by friends, ignored by the police, to someone who had actively reclaimed agency over his life. The silver necklace became a symbol of survival. The rose is a reminder of beauty amid trauma, and my relationship with Isaac, Lily, and our son a testament to resilience. Now I wake up with purpose. I maintain therapy appointments, journal nightly, and attend weekly support meetings. I mentor others navigating trauma, helping them understand that complex PTSD doesn't define their future. I've rebuilt friendships, reclaimed my career, and created a home filled with trust and love. The day I stood at my son Jake's birthday, exposing Ethan, remains etched in my memory not just as a climax of confrontation, but as a first step toward reclaiming my life. That day, I realized that even when someone tries to turn your strengths into weaknesses, evidence, courage, and a network of loyal allies can transform trauma into empowerment. Today, I am Douglas, a survivor, a father, a husband, a man who learned to rebuild after betrayal shattered everything. I walk past the neighbours who whisper, not with shame, but with confidence. I look at my son, at Lily, at Isaac, and I know that although the past shaped me, it does not control me. I survived Ethan. I survived betrayal. And I am no longer just existing, I am thriving.